Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. It is now 11 a.m. Got a great show lined up for you today. Despite medical advances, humans still have a 100% mortality rate, yet only 25% to 30% of adults undertake any end-of-life planning. Wills, advanced medical directives, or funeral planning. Why the disconnect? Our guest today is Gail Rubin. She is the author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for those who don't plan to die. This was also a TV series as well as a book. So please stay tuned. Keep listening. Gail will be joining us very, very shortly, and we'll do kind of a deep dive into this topic. But if you are a longtime listener, you know we always reserve just the first few moments of the show to kind of tell you just a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and the Gulf Coast region when it comes to financial literacy. So really, right now we are in the summer. I just did a talk out at Tailored Brands, which is it's a big company in Southwest Houston that has Men's Warehouse and JOS Banks. But we did 3 different seminars there that were through the health insurance company there. They're doing a wellness talk and then also a financial wellness talk. And so I did 3 different talks on money basics. We just barely touched the topic of estate planning, and oh boy, everybody they don't like talking about that. Anytime you mention death, you'll see hand wringing and kind of people getting nervous about it. So interested to dive a little bit further with this with Gail as to maybe why this is. But with that, we also do have another TRS or ORP talk coming up in about 2 weeks. That's going to be at the local library on Westheimer, the Young Men branch of the Houston Public Library, so there'll be more details on that. With that, let's go ahead and get Gail on the line here. Gail, are you there?
I am here. Great to be with you, Christopher.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Every day on this side of the sod is a good day.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me share just a little bit about you with the listeners here. You are a CT pioneering death educator who uses humor and funny films to teach about end-of-life topics. Award-winning speaker. She knocked them dead at TEDx in 2015. And you are the author of 3 different books on end-of-life issues. One calling A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, Hail and Farewell, Cremation Ceremonies, Templates and Tips, and then finally Kicking the Bucket List, 100 Downsizing and Organizing Things to Do Before You Die. You also have an event, and we'll make sure to mention this again, but you have an event coming up here in the Woodlands. Can you tell us just a little bit about that, maybe to kick it off?
Yes, I am going to be presenting Laughing in the Face of Death, Funny Films for Funeral Planning, on October 2nd. I believe that's a Tuesday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Woodlands United Methodist Church, and sponsored by Avanti Senior Living, and tickets are $10. All proceeds will be donated to a local nonprofit, and we can get you information about that if you want to email me, Gail, Gail, at agoodgoodbye.com, and I understand you'll also put the link for people to sign up on your podcast
Yes, absolutely. So we have the live radio version that's going on right now. So if you're listening and you're driving, you don't have to pull over. We also have that link available on the podcast notes as well. So Gail, tell us a little bit of kind of how did you get started in this? Why death? This topic? How did this come about?
I'm really a cheerful person, actually. I come from a background as a public relations professional and event planner, and I got married for the second time in 2000, and we had a really creative Jewish Western wedding, and everybody had such a good time. I wanted to write a book about creative life cycle events and call it Matchings, Hatchings, and Dispatchings, about weddings and births and deaths, and was able to do a monthly feature in our local newspaper by that name, and it was the stories about death and funerals that got the most reader response. And I figured, there's plenty of creative wedding planning books. We don't need another one of those. But at the time, there wasn't much about creative funeral planning. So I focused on funerals, and A Good Goodbye was my first book, and it changed the course of my career. I became a Certified Thanatologist. That's what the CT stands for. And that is a death educator, but I am quite unlike most death educators out there. I'm not a grief counselor. I'm all about getting people to know what they need to know before they go. And funeral planning is a huge financial issue. If you don't look at what you need to do before somebody dies, you're going to wind up with the family, the loved ones, scrambling to make expensive decisions under duress of grief and, looking for information. There's so much information about our lives that we need to know in order to plan a funeral, shut down an estate. It's very complicated. And as you said, less than 30% of adults are doing this kind of planning. And you can really benefit from having this conversation. My motto is, just like talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead.
I love that. Well, one of the things I was talking about is yesterday we did a kind of a financial literacy seminar, and we just barely touch on estate planning, just kind of introducing the idea of you need to have even a simple will if you haven't done something like that. And boy, the crowd got quiet. Why is that? Why do people avoid discussing end-of-life issues?
Very interesting. If you've never heard of Dr. Ernest Becker and the Denial of Death, this was a book. He was a sociologist, and this book won a Pulitzer Prize back in 1973. In it, he spells out the terror management theory, which is based on the idea of what's called mortality salience. When we become aware, as human beings who use language and symbols to project thoughts into the future or remember the past, we become aware of the fact that we're not going to be here. So part of the terror management theory is that we want to stay alive as long as humanly possible, and even perhaps become immortal. So we achieve immortality either literally through religious beliefs, the idea of a soul, of reincarnation, things like that, or symbolically by having children, or by building buildings, or writing books, something that's going to physically live on beyond our physical lifetimes. So when we are fulfilling this idea of our self-esteem about how well we are fulfilling our roles in keeping the faith about this eternalness of ourselves. That is called self-esteem, and it's an interesting concept because I've read studies that say that 2/3 of adults have low self-esteem. So if you're sitting in an audience, look to your left, look to your right. One of you is okay, two of you are in trouble. And mortality salience makes people aware of their eventual death makes them more of what they are. So if they have good self-esteem, if they are loving and kind, those are the kind of people who are planning ahead. This is my Gail Rubin's philosophy. And so maybe that one person out of three has got the self-esteem to say, I can do this and it won't kill me. Whereas other people who might be fearful or angry or just feeling like they're not living up to what their life goals are might be more inclined to push this away and not talk about it. So sort of in a nutshell, that is why people are not planning ahead.
You mentioned a little bit, I'm going to kind of backtrack here because you mentioned a little bit about cost and the financial aspects of it. And that's one of the things I try to tell people about. It's like, you need to have this on your radar so that you're not leaving this behind for a headache for somebody else. But can you tell us a little bit about maybe how expensive funerals are these days?
Yes. Now, of course, it varies by market and by provider, which is why this is so important to shop before you drop, is my motto, one of my other mottos. There is a wide range of costs and services that are offered by funeral homes and cemeteries. So let me give you a great tip. There's a website called parting.com, Parting.com. It was started by a gentleman named Tyler Yamasaki, who was put in charge of planning for his grandmother's funeral. And where do you go when your grandma has died and you're a young millennial? You go online. Well, at the time, there was no comparison site for costs for funeral homes, for direct burial, for direct cremation, for a full traditional burial, or a cremation with services. So he put this website together by getting the information from funeral homes all across the United States in many different markets. So I did a quick look on parting.com to give you some costs in the Houston area. So a traditional funeral, quote unquote, with a viewing and services would run $4,000 to $12,000 plus a cemetery plot, which could be anywhere from a couple thousand to more dollars of cemetery costs. So you could be looking at anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 possibly for a funeral, which is why a number of people are like, well, let me get the cremation service.
Right.
Direct cremation in Houston runs anywhere from $700 to $5,500.
Wow.
A direct burial would run anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000, which is basically the funeral home takes the body into their care. You get a casket. You have a graveside service. But that, again, does not include the cost for the cemetery, which could, again, bring it up, a number of thousands of dollars. So really, you need to shop around before there's a death in the family so that you don't have to be making all of this research and under duress of grief, as well as pulling information together if that hasn't been done.
I think, as we mentioned earlier, if people are wanting to, live forever and leave this legacy and these books and these buildings and children behind, they don't necessarily want to leave a big bill for them to pay as well as part of that memory and that legacy.
Well, it's interesting. I was standing outside a store waiting for the proprietor to return from lunch, and there were other people waiting for this guy to come back too. And I struck up a conversation with this gentleman. He had retired recently, and I told him I was a death educator, and he was like, I don't care. I'm just going to leave it for other people to deal with. I don't care. I'm not going to be here. And you do hear that a lot. And so I would bring up, well, but you have children and, you have an ex-wife and you have a girlfriend now and you have a house and you have pets and there's a lot to consider. And he was just like, they can all sort it out. So that's not very nice for your loved ones to have to take on that responsibility. There's a funeral home here in Albuquerque where I'm based that has a slogan in their ads for pre-need planning saying, "Your children have enough baggage. Don't don't make your funeral arrangements be another piece of it."
That's a good lead way into the next question, because I run into that as well. I'll have people either on the will, where it's kind of, it's almost like a defense reaction. They're like, well, I don't care, I'm going to die anyway, and I won't be here, which is a really kind of selfish way to come at it. But I think it's more of a defense or like a reaction. Some people have that same plan for retirement. They haven't done anything, and they're like, well, I don't need to do it. So when we talk about death, what happens to families and businesses when someone dies without a will?
Well, the state takes over. And basically, if you want your stuff, your assets to go to particular people, you need a will or a trust to spell that out. Because without a will, even with a will, an estate would go to probate court. Now, I am not a lawyer, so I'll just keep this light on the details on this. But basically, if you don't have a will, the state has a line of succession to dictate who will get your stuff, your assets, after you die. And judging from what a lot of people say about the government, they wouldn't want the government deciding who gets what of their stuff.
Exactly.
So that alone is a really good reason to have a will.
What about some of the, and we talked about the cost here, are there ways or creative ways to reduce the cost other than that? You mentioned shopping it, but are there other things that we might not have gotten on our radar, things that we need to be cognizant of?
Yes, well, so of course people are choosing cremation in greater and greater numbers because it is so much cheaper than a traditional funeral. So if you know you want to have cremation, it certainly pays to shop around early. However, there's another option to get a free cremation. People can donate their body to science. Number one choice would be to donate to a local medical school that would have an anatomical body donation program. MD Anderson is right there in Houston, and that might be an option, the various universities. And you can, if there is no medical school option, there are national body donation services that will take the body. They work with local funeral homes to make arrangements, take the body, and they'll use body parts. Now, this gets into a little area of concern for me about body donation is that they're basically harvesting body parts, knee joints, so surgeons can practice surgery on a real body part, on a joint, without, having to affect a live person, or spines or heads or whatever, and then they're selling those to other organizations and then cremating what's left and returning that to the family. So if you want to get a free cremation, just know that that's what's going on there, and many of these companies are profiting off of the donation of bodies. But you still get a free cremation, death certificates, and probably a nice urn to boot as part of that.
Interesting. I had not heard of that one.
Yeah.
And we are near the Houston Medical Center, is one of the biggest medical hubs in the U.S. So MD Anderson's out of there, UT Healthcare. I'm sure of the many different facilities. There's probably a program there that we weren't aware of before this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also there's a new trend in families doing home funerals where you can keep the body at home. I did not have a chance to look up what the rules are in Texas for that, but I will know it before I come there to do my talk in October. but families can keep the body at home and work with a local funeral home perhaps to handle the paperwork and transporting the body. But families can wash and dress the body themselves, and it is a growing trend where people are, it's also a lovely way to say goodbye to people. So much has happened with the medical establishment and the funeral industry that a lot of times people don't have time to say goodbye to their loved one. It's like they go from the hospital to the funeral home and, okay, maybe you have a viewing, but the idea of a home funeral is to spend time with the body and truly understand that this loved one is now dead and will be, their body will go either to be cremated or buried. But getting the involvement of the family, it's kind of bringing back this whole cycle of life awareness that we don't really have much anymore because of the way things have evolved with the medical system and the funeral industry.
It does sound like a more intimate ceremony, a way for the family that's not very different than what people are used to. But that option, you're seeing that more and more as one of the trends out there.
There's growing interest in it for sure, as well as green burial, which we can talk more about if you wish. But the idea of a home funeral as a cost-saving measure is also a new trend, though, with people wanting to be involved.
Well, yeah. Tell us
they
about.
They used to be involved. Yeah.
Tell us about green burial. What exactly is that?
Interesting. Green burial is basically burial before the invention of embalming, which was around the Civil War. The idea that you just keep the body intact, because embalming involves draining the blood out of the body and replacing it with a fluid that includes formaldehyde and carcinogens in the fluids, but it helps preserve the body for a while. But putting the body in a refrigerator or on dry ice to keep it fresh for a couple of days before burial or, yes, we're talking about burial. Putting the body in a cotton or linen shroud. You could put it in a biodegradable casket, could be plain pine box, could be a wicker basket or seagrass casket, even wool caskets. Anything that's going to biodegrade and then put in contact with the earth. So it's truly ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And it's a wonderful way to help preserve the environment. There are green burial grounds that are popping up all over the country. I will need to find out if there's anything in the Houston area, but people can look at the website for the Green Burial Council, which is a certifying organization for cemeteries to become recognized as a green burial ground. And there's different levels of greenness. There could be a traditional cemetery that does have vaults and landscaped or sculpted lawns, but maybe have a part where there are an opportunity for the body to be in contact with the earth. By the way, Jewish burial is naturally green burial because all of those things, keeping the body intact, no embalming, the cotton linen clothing, a plain pine box, and put in contact with the earth, that is the closest you can get to a green burial in a conventional cemetery. And just ask for the a liner which would hold the earth up over the casket. This is why a lot of cemeteries that have traditionally done, they want to keep the ground level. So either a concrete or a polydome box is put over the casket, but the casket is still in contact with the earth underneath. So that's how you can get a green burial, and it uses less resources, and it's a nicer, closer to the earth way to have a burial.
Interesting. You've given us two really good resources. You mentioned that website from just the Green Burial Council. There's more information there. I know state laws differ from state to state, so this will give a resource people can reach out and find out. And then earlier you gave us the website for that parting.com for people who've had family members that pass away, and they're looking at how to what to do. What do we do now? One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I've had the experience of being an executor, which was both an honor and also work.
Oh, it's a lot of work, yes.
What do executors need to know before they take on that job of processing an estate?
Well, for one thing, before you choose an executor, make sure they're organized and can track time, and they're good fiduciaries. People are good with dealing with money. An executor can be a spouse, it could be an adult child, it could be a legally appointed friend or a relative, or it could even be a trust company named by the person who died in their will or trust to take care of all of these different aspects of shutting down someone's life, their estate. You know, there's so much to do. You have to get the death certificates, meet with the attorney. You need to get testamentary letters for the executor so that you can go into the bank and say, hey, I'm the executor. Here's proof. You know, we need to get this bank account taken care of. Well, and, you know, there's safe deposit boxes. You have to find all of the heirs, the next of kin, handle the probate filing if, you know, it's a will and not a trust. You know, are there life insurance policies? You got to deal with real estate if real estate is owned. You know, what happens to the car? What happens to financial assets like stocks and IRAs and CDs and mortgages? And there's all this stuff. In fact, I put together a list of 50 things for the executor to do, which I offer as a free download as a PDF from my website, A Good Goodbye. And, you know, I was just reading off just a few of the many things that an executor's got to do. So it's interesting, when my husband and I got married, we named a friend of ours as the executor for us. Well, about a year or so ago, he and his wife moved away from Albuquerque, and we were like, I think we better get a new executor. And we wound up actually going with a trust company because neither of us have children, and we figured this would be a way to ensure that what we're dictating in our wills and our trust actually is carried out and carried out well. Now, the thing about being an executor, like you mentioned, it is hard work, but you can bill for that time. As the executor, it's something you should probably talk about with the person who's making the will or the trust before finalizing that. But yes, I'm going to be the executor for my parents, and we agreed that I would I would bill the estate an hourly rate for all the time that I spend working on settling and distributing the assets. So that's something else to know. If somebody asks you to be an executor, you can charge for your time.
Very, very interesting. You mentioned that you had a friend of your family, and then they ended up moving out of state. The one that I was the executor on, the witnesses actually passed away, or they either moved or passed away of the will. And so even though we had the will together, because there weren't witnesses to verify that they were there, it was as if she didn't have a will. So,
oh man.
So that's something to think about. If they're going to be, are the witnesses still around? Or have they moved? So that's all things that need to be on your radar, things you need to think about. Well, we're bumping right here towards the end of the show. Gail, I know you mentioned the website. I'm on the website right now. It's a goodgoodbye.com. You even had a TV series on a lot of these issues that people can get access to that through the website. Is that correct?
Yes, it's available as a 4-DVD set if people want to purchase that. The programs, you can also find them online as YouTube videos.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
And I'm looking forward to coming there October 2nd to present Laughing in the Face of Death, Funny Films for Funeral Planning. And we'll be at there October 2nd from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Woodlands United Methodist Church.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.